Hey, everybody. Welcome on into ClayShare Live at 5. And I'm really excited to be here. It's been a few weeks and I'm back for just tonight. And we have a special guest. We have Alex from Alexandria Pottery Co joining us. And she's going to show you how to hand build a pottery mason jar, something you might have never thought of doing. But we all know glass mason jars are really popular and they're great. But how many of us can make our own glass mason jar? Not me, but I certainly could make my very own pottery one, and you will be able to as well after this broadcast. So I just want to remind everybody, if you haven't gone to clayshare.com or downloaded the ClayShare app yet, you should do so. We have a fabulous free trial if you're not a member, but if you do sign up to be a member, you save on so many products along with our workshops, our rolling pins, and texture mats and rim templates. Now, Alex will probably talk about this, but I'm going to put it out there. She is offering 10% off for everybody with the code POTTERY10, but members of ClayShare get 15% off. And no, I'm not going to tell you the code here because that would defeat the members only situation. You need to go to the ClayShare app or clayshare.com. And if you go into ClayShare Prime, there's a members only discount area that only members can see. Only members see it. So I have to check that out. All right, so we're going to head on out to Alex so she can get started. I know she has a lot to share with us tonight. Hey, Alex, how are you doing?
Hey, honey, doing good. Thanks for having us back.
I'm so thrilled you can be here with us tonight.
Yeah, what a fun project we have ahead.
I'm excited. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's check it out. So I love mason jars. That's what we've used in our home for years, just for drinking glasses. So along the way, it's fun because you can see in the pottery community, there's this unspoken challenge of, can I make this out of clay? Or like, can I make this myself? Which is actually why the tooling came about. So I was like, I wonder if we can make this. So mason jars have been on my list of forms to make because it's actually a really complex form. It's common. Everyone knows what a mason jar is, but when you really start breaking down the form, it gets kind of complex. So I'm just going to introduce the form here for you guys. I'll explain why it's so helpful to have a form to build against, and then we'll get started and I'll show you how to make. This is our large mason jar. So that's the jig we'll be using today. So the cool thing about a mason jar is that it's not completely round. It has these flat points at the side, and then it has rounded corners. And then of course you've got, like any other jar, you've got the shoulder and then it comes up and then you've got a neck. So it seems simple if you're a glass blower or something like that, but when you're making something like this out of clay, it's really hard, at least for me, to get the flat spots, the round spots, a shoulder, and then a neck, and have them look good and be able to do it in like a reasonable amount of time. I think if I gave myself a lot of time, I could do it, but it just never seemed like anything I wanted to replicate and do over and over. So my wonderful husband, Scott, I was like, we have a ton of mason jars. Take this, please make me something. And he really knocked it out of the park, and it is so much fun. So if you don't know what a mason jar is, it's a canning jar. It's typically used to can food, but now I think people use it. I put flowers in mine. I've got this adorable cork top situation going. So I'm going to make a bunch of jars like this, storage jars. So people use it for so much more than food. It's kind of become like this decorative icon. So let's get started. I'll show you what you need. You really, the tooling, like a lot of my projects, is really minimal. So the form is really helpful in here. And then the cutter that comes with the form, we do sell our cutters separately, but for this one, because of the flat into the round corners, we do really recommend you get the cutter that goes with the form. Or you can just freehand it. You can put it down on your plate and trace the bottom if you don't want to have an excess of cutters around. I understand that too. So we've got our jig. This is what the finished product, this is unglazed, so you'll see. And this thing holds, it's I think like 26 ounces, it's massive. So this wouldn't make like a good mug, but we do have other sizes, and I will do a mug size. And then of course, we have our salt and pepper shaker, because who doesn't want a little mason jar salt and pepper shaker? It's just so cute. So that's a great way to use up scrap clay. So I've got our clay already cut out. You can find our templates if you have not been to our website, alexandriapotteryco.com, and under our extras tab, you go down to templates, and then you'll just look for the mason jar, and there'll be 3 templates available depending on which size you have. For this size jig, you will need to print 2, cut, and tape. And once you get your template dialed into the sizing you like, you can use something more permanent like craft foam, which is what I use in my studio. So we always recommend adding a little bit more onto the sides just for good measure. Haha, there's a pun for you. Just for good measure, just until you get your clay and your template dialed in, and then you can do what you need to do. So that's available free for download. Make sure you're printing to 100% because it gets kind of tough if it's not to scale. So I've already got my bottom cut out here. So I will set this to the side. And because this is a mason jar, there are no attachments. So we can all clap for a no handle project, which sometimes is a breath of fresh air. I personally like handles, but it is really nice to do a repeat project when you don't have any attachments, because after we're done building, we'll let it go leather hard, you wipe it down, and you're pretty much done there. And I love that. So we've got our jig. I've got my bottom cut out. I've got my slab of clay. I work a lot with double-sided texture. Jess, I still need some of your texture mats. Every time I come to do a clay show, I'm like, oh, I wish I had one of Jess's mats. So I roll this.
Well,
through
don't
my
leave
slab
after the
roller.
broadcast and stay after school, and we will chat.
We will
get you
chat.
some.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, so I can get a hold of some of this. Okay, so anyhow, I have texture on both sides. The build for this with texture versus non-texture is really similar, and I'll explain what to do if you have a naked slab of clay. So I've got my slab here. My texture is non-directional, so it doesn't really matter which way's up or down. And we are going to build our mason jar with the bottom on the table. Our jigs work best wide side down. So if you ever have one of our jigs and you're unsure how to do it, you want to go wide side down. It's just more stable on the table. And then I'll have Scott switch the camera for you so you can see what I'm doing here. So to prep my slab, here, let me get you in frame here. To prep my slab, I have my clay's been setting out. We rolled it yesterday and it's been setting out. I actually let it set out overnight here in Wisconsin. I can get away with that. But I know my clay is at the right consistency for me when I'm not leaving fingerprints. So it's still bendy. It still has some flop to it. But when I am touching it, I am not picking up any clay and I'm not transferring any fingerprints. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of the wetness of the clay that I'm working with. So we are going to start with our generous dusting of cornstarch here. This is our release agent. You may use anything that you're comfortable with in your studio. I like cornstarch. It burns off in the kiln. I always joke, I had like the longest lasting kiln elements. My local potter's shop, Vince is his name. He's really great. He's like, how long have you had these? I was like, they were original to my kiln. So I think I have some kind of record for not changing out my elements. So from personal experience, I can tell you the cornstarch isn't going to affect anything. It burns off. If you are underglazing on greenware, you will want to wipe all the cornstarch away. It will affect underglaze if you're not bisquing first. So I'm going to work neat and tidy here, and I'm going to take my death rib. Oops, I'm going to gouge my clay. Just, I ever tell you that I have Easter eggs in my YouTube tutorials where you can see my clumsy potter moment? I really, really do. There's a group of people who kind of like, they get a kick out of it. So anytime like what I did here, I just gouged my clay. That's an Easter egg. And we all have good fun in my videos because I'm always doing something clumsy. Okay, so we work clay and then jig. That's my workflow. And I'm just going to rock this up. And my clay is pretty stiff, so it is able to stand up on its own, which is nice. But the jig gives me the third hand in the studio, which is really great, especially when we start getting into larger forms where, you know, you need other things to help prop up. The jig is kind of like the third hand for that. So I'm going to involve my banding wheel almost immediately because I'm going to need to rotate my work. If you don't have a banding wheel, that's okay. You can use a piece of cardboard or cardstock inside. And actually, you know what? I'm going to interrupt this broadcast with a very special thing. I forgot to do something, but we can do that, right? So I've been overbending. I don't know if you all have heard about that. This is like a brand new thing that I heard, but it makes complete sense. So I have, sometimes with my hand builds, my seam puckers a little bit, where you get a little bit of a point at the seam. But I've started to overbend, and my work, I've noticed, has been really staying more true and more round. So for my fellow potters out there who are maybe having some issues at the seam with the seam separating, or the seam puckering, here's a quick tip and I'll show you how to do it. You just need a dowel or a rolling pin. It just has to be smaller in diameter to what you're using here. Jeff, I don't know, have you ever taught this before?
Like when you overbend, yeah, sometimes,
Okay.
but
I'll
you go for it. You got the show, baby. You do it all
Yeah, there we
tonight.
go. Here we
It's
go.
all you.
So
You're the star.
it's me. I'm just gonna go rogue. I'm going off my script. I'm kidding. I never have a script. Okay, so here's the dowel that I'm using. It's just a regular rolling pin. And what I've been doing is making full contact with one end of my clay. And I'm gonna try to do this backward because why not? Okay, and then what you're gonna do is just roll the clay against whatever the round object you're using all the way. And what we're gonna do is just start putting in some clay memory, which is always a good idea. Especially if you've got more than one project going, I'll do this and I'll kind of have my little cake rolls of clay waiting patiently for me to do something with them. The really important part are the ends. So I make sure that this is completely flat against the clay, and then voila, you get kind of this little roll effect. And then I will, if I'm gonna let it set for a little bit, I will loosen it up, and then I have kind of my little assembly line. I typically do this before cornstarch, but I forgot today. So I made a little bit of a mess on the outside, but honestly, it'll be fine. We can come back to the other one. And as I unfurl this, you can see that there's already a little bit of a bend in here, which is exactly what we want to see. We want to encourage that seam to come together nicely. We want to encourage the shape of the pot that we were making. Okay, so back to our regularly scheduled program. So I've got my clay. I will rock it onto my jig here, and then I'm going to grab my banding wheel. I can lift this up and handle this because I've got the jig on the inside, so I'm not losing any shape there. No harm, no foul. Okay, so my beginning step here is to apply pressure to the back of the jig. So what I usually do is I support the front. Is this a weird angle? Let me see if I can do something better here for you guys. Maybe that's better. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure that the clay is making contact with the jig starting at the back. The reason I start with the back is as I'm putting pressure on the clay, it is going to move. You are going to displace some clay, and we want to encourage the clay to come toward the seam here. So I'm just going to go all the way around. I decide which part of the seam I want to go flat, and then we're going to start shaping that. Now I'm going to lift this up. You can see my pretty little gouge there. We'll hide that with the foot. And then I almost have complete contact all the way around, which is what we're looking for. If you leave this back part flapping out a little bit, it can kind of, it'll mess your form up. It won't be completely level. And then that can give you some trouble at the foot stage. So now I've got nice contact around. Before we even move into the shoulder, I'm going to address the seam here. We are going to button up on the form. I'll get you a little example here. What I want to do here is do my bevel cut, and then we are going to slip and score right up into the bottom of the shoulder there. See if you can on my little mini, we can see that. We want to leave the top loose because as we're forming around the shoulder, that clay is going to want to move, and we want it to be free to do that. So we're just going to button up at the bottom there. So, hey, I've got my little Sula things. These have saved me with my my needle tools. Holy cow. These things are like dangerous. So I've got my little topper so I can be safe with my knife. Okay, so anyhow, I'm gonna come in and eyeball what I need to take off. It's about 1/4 inch. At this step, I always encourage you to take off small bits of clay at a time. So that's just a small sliver. And we don't so much have to worry about the top matching. Right now, we're just looking to match the bottom. And I should say, when I place my clay on the mason jig, I want my seam to end up on a flat part, but kind of close to a corner. So when you're closing it up, I feel like when you're closing up the seam, and if it's at a natural corner, it's easier to blend in. But that just might be my crazy potter logic, which I have in spades. Okay, so I need to take just a little bit more off. If you want to be more precise with this, you can take this off the jig at any time, lay it flat for your measurements. I kind of like to eyeball until I feel like it's going to line up nicely. So there on the bottom, my seam is going to nest in really nicely. And because I have such heavy texture, my pattern, I'm able to really conceal that, and my pattern just kind of flows into itself again. So I'm going to do my scoring and my slipping. There's such controversy online right now, Jess. I don't know if you're hearing it, but like, if you have to score or not to score, that is the question. Like, is it enough just to slip?
I mean, potters have
measure?
been not scoring for decades, and
Sure.
I think it's personal preference. I'm a
I
fan
think
of
so
slipping
too.
and scoring, but I know Bill Van Gilder doesn't. So I
Yeah,
mean, I think it's to each their own. And there's like I have always taught, there's no right or wrong. There's
there's no
just
right
your
or wrong.
way.
That's right.
And I think if somebody's working and whatever they're doing for a technique works for them, then keep on keeping on.
I love it. That's the right answer. Okay, so I think, and it depends on like the wetness of your clay, right? Because if you're working really wet, it'll just marry itself together. Or if you work drier, then you might need the extra help. I'm such a creature of habit. How I learned is how I like do it forever. So like that's how I learned. So that's just like I'm like, that's how I'll do it until the day I die. I don't even know if it's necessary or not. Okay, so we are putting light pressure. As I feel the slip coming out, I'm drying my hands. If you have wet hands and you're touching your clay, you can leave fingerprints, you can lift your pattern. I find if my hands stay nice and dry, I don't disrupt my pattern there. So I am now tacked up from here to the bottom. I can lift a little bit and make sure that bottom is secure, and then we'll do more work on that bottom join when we get there. So now I have this freedom of movement up top here. We have left this open. So as we start pushing in the clay against the jig, here comes the fun part, where we start to push it into this groove and into the neck and into our rim there. Then we have that freedom and we're not fighting against the clay. The clay will move up and it will move toward the seam. And with that, we'll be able to cut off the excess and it'll be like it never happened. So here is with this project, usually I'll pull out a clay paddle or I'll pull out a brayer. But I found for the mason jar, just the heat of my hands, it's such a cool thing. I actually really love this part. Just the heat of my hands will start to bring and shape this clay into where I need to. So as I start moving in, I'm moving with even pressure. I'm allowing the clay to move where it needs to. If this front flap starts getting obnoxious for you, if you feel like it's too much to manage, you can start cutting as you go. Again, that's personal preference there. But I am going to just start going around and I'm going to start squeezing. I'm giving my clay a hug. And I'm not worried about the top yet. We're not worried about the neck yet. We're really just into this shoulder here. And I'm not going to neglect where this front flap of clay is. If we leave that stick straight, I think that was contributing to some of the buckling at the seam. So even though we're not slipped or scored there, we're not joining that yet, I'm still going to bring that clay in and put in that shape. Now this is the time where you can just enjoy the feel of the clay. Just enjoy what you're doing. I think sometimes we get really tool driven and we forget that our hands can do really cool things. So, or at least that's how I am in my studio. So it's kind of neat as I was practicing, I like to test our jigs out. And as I was practicing to see which method I'd like the best, for this jig by far is just my hands. And you can see we're already starting to get that really lovely curve here. The only reason I can do this with such pressure, and I really am squeezing hard, you can see how this top is coming in nice and tight, is because the jig is giving me some counter pressure. I would never do this if my clay was freestanding, or I would have to have something, another hand on the inside, or a paddle or something. Putting this kind of pressure just one way on the clay would absolutely collapse your form, unless you have something with structure on the inside, which is so very cool. And you can see I'm not lifting any of my pattern here. I'm not leaving sticky fingerprints. That tells you how dry my clay is. Really mess around when you're working with our jigs. Try different clay wetness and see what works best for the project that you're trying to do. You might try the mason jar and you might need this to be softer, and that's okay. So I feel comfortable with that. I kind of know when to stop because I start to feel the form from the inside. And I know that I've now made contact all the way around. If you are making this project and you have no texture, that's fine. I wouldn't come in and do as much pressure because I think you'll see a lot of the divots from your hands. I would really rely on a wet sponge at this point, turning and sponging. And I would also rely on a red rib to just really start forming and blending. So if you have a naked slab, that's totally okay. I would maybe just switch up the method of smushing and forming this shoulder and neck to just sponge and red rib. So I feel good about that. You can see I've got a lot of contact on the way in here. And you're not going to get full contact at the seam because of where it's crossing. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut off some of the top here. We're not going to go down to the jig yet. I just want it to be manageable. I take maybe 1/4 inch off. I want to get anything that's rippling, any clay that's rippling at the top. That tells me that's just a bunch of extra there. And then I am going to close up the seam and then we will completely make this top level. So I want to stay in line with my current seam here. See if I can get it in the way that you can see it. So my current seam is running up right here. And then it really takes a hard right where the clay has crossed over. So I want to keep my seam as straight as possible. So I'm going to follow my original and I'm going to just start slicing off little skinny pieces. And I'm just slicing to right about where I stopped my slip and score for the first time. If you go, like I can see in here where my score marks are, that's okay. That's not a big deal. There's no need to cut any further than your original cut there. So I'm going to take this other side and I can feel my knife is touching the form on the inside. And I am going to just keep going. And then at this point, I can start bringing that in. I can see that I'm a little long here still. So I'm going to take a little bit more off there. The seam gets kind of fussy, but the project as a whole is a really quick project. So I don't mind taking a few extra moments here. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns while I'm fussing over my seam?
There's a nice conversation going on about slipping and scoring and types of slip. But it's nice, so I like it very much.
I like it.
And nice. A question about using cornstarch on the inside. Does it ever leave any texture behind?
Oh, good. Oh, I have not had that one yet. That's a great question. Not in my experience, but I will disclose and say that I use a lot of texture to begin with. So it's very rare that I have a naked slab, but even on my naked slab, I can't really, nothing that shows through. I think if you wanted texture, you would have to use some kind of texture tool for that. But no, even when I brush it off, it doesn't even leave any texture behind. That's a great question.
It's a good one. And then it led to an interesting side conversation about people use stockings or nylons.
Oh, yeah.
And then someone said you could probably use patterned nylons on the inside and maybe get texture from that. So if you got some fishnet hanging around or something, you stick them on there and you can have interesting texture.
You will likely see me fishing before you see those on my legs, by the way.
So Alex, your website, Alexandria Pottery Co.com.
Yes.
And do you ship to Canada?
We do ship to Canada. My sweet Canadian friends, please, please, please check out what's going on with your duties and fees right now. We work very closely with anyone ordering out of the country just to make sure we get the best shipping situation for them. And it's really not the same everywhere. So if you are having questions or concerns, feel free to message me and we'll make sure we get the best case scenario. I think right now, USPS right now is what we are finding gives the lowest rate and isn't giving like last minute big fees at the end when, before you can get your stuff. Okay, so we're all buttoned up there. And then I have this 1.5 inch brayer. So if my seam starts getting a little unruly and bulbous, I can come through with that. But ultimately, even though the pattern doesn't match up 100%, it's still really nice. And then I like to see, I've always enjoyed seeing the seam. If you really dislike that, you can come back in with whatever pattern you're laying and you can push it over to try to conceal that. So that is it. That's almost all of our construction here. What we need to do yet is level off our top, and then we'll get our bottom put on, and then we can talk about some really fun uses for these jars. So I'm going to level off the top. I've been having this thought of making your clay taller than the jig, and then you could kind of frill it out and make more of a vase like this too, which is really pretty. And all you would have to do with that is leave your clay as long as you wanted. So what I guess the point is, the forms that we make for you are just jumping off points. My favorite conversations are when people send me messages and they'll show me different ways that they're using our forms, different from what we created it for. And I love it. I feel like that's like the best thing to take a tool and then just like run with it and make it your own. So I could have left this long and then taken some water and kind of frilled out, and then you can have more of a base. Or you could bring it in, you could bring that more narrow too. But for today, for this project, since I am fixing to put little corks in these, I do want it to be relatively level. So easy peasy. I like to start close to the seam, and then the jig gives us a completely level surface. So I'm going to take my knife here. I'm going to support with my left hand, and then I'm going to just turn, keeping my knife at the same angle and letting the jig guide my cut. So it's really a no-brainer. And then what you will reveal here sometimes, which is really interesting, I had gapping in there that I didn't even realize because the top was longer. So now I know here that I need to come through like this little spot there and down there, and I can come through with the warmth of my hands, and I can tuck that into where it's supposed to be. So the form is great, but we're always like, it is still our responsibility to make sure things are looking good and things are as they should be. So this is not a drinking vessel. I don't intend, not this size, the size down. Although I do drink out of my large mason jar, so it might be a drinking vessel for me, but the average person probably doesn't need 26 ounces at a pop. But I like to just come through. We don't know what people are going to be using this for. It can hold liquid. They can put beverages in here. So I'm just going to come while it's still on the jig, and I'm going to soften up the lip here, taking care of any imperfections. And then this also just softens up our texture. If your texture is running into the top, it just kind of smooths that over, so we're not having any unnecessary cracking at that point. Now, my little sponge was kind of damp. Anytime we're adding moisture, we want to make sure that we're just releasing the clay from the jig a little bit. You never want to introduce a ton of moisture between the plastic and the clay. It will just stick. No amount of cornstarch is going to help you if you get a lot of water in there. So that's our top. I am going to come through. We will flip. I'm going to do the bottom, and then I'll show you how to kind of close everything, just wrap everything up there. So I like to do on the bottom the same as what I do on the top. Let me get you a little taller here. Sometimes I'm my own cameraman. We've talked about this, right? There we go. Okay, so the top here, I'm just making sure I have nice contact all the way around. You can see the top gets kind of schmutzy. My seam is there's a little gap there. I can fix that when I finish the inside. So what I want to do is make sure that this is nice and level. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the top. I'm going to keep my knife nice and level. I pick a spot and I just go for it. Having something like a banding bat or anything that spins makes this really quick work, because you can anchor your elbow onto the table, keep that same angle, and make a really nice even cut. So now I know, because my jig is even, I know that my clay is even around the bottom. And while we've got it on the jig, I'm going to do two things at once. I like to score the bottom at this point. This doesn't always work with every one of our jigs, but with this one, it for sure does. And the reason for this is because of the straight sides and the round sides. I want to do any kind of work that involves pressure while the jig is still in, so I'm not losing any of that detail. So I'm going to release. We're not altering the shape here. We're just making sure that we don't have any clay wrapped in or any clay stuck. I am going to remove the jig before we put the bottom on. In some of our projects, you can actually attach the bottom right away to it. Okay, so if you watched our faceted cup video, this jig is very similar to that when it comes to removal. Because you have flat spots here, we can't twist the jig all the way around to remove it. If you twist complete revolutions, you will bring the rounded part into where it's supposed to be flat, and you'll make that part round. So for removing the jig for the mason jar and for like anything that has flat sides, I'm just gonna shimmy it back and forth, just small wiggles until I feel the form pop, it'll release, and then we can slide it out. So, sorry I don't have an overhead camera. I think that's pretty good. You can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm just gonna wiggle, 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 and then I'm gonna turn, wait, whoops, turn, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Now I felt it pop. I'm gonna just make sure I'm loose on the other side there. Okay, so take your time at that point. I felt there's like, you can feel the air kind of release from the form, but I like to take it easy. I don't just crank on it. I like to just kind of go slow at that point because you want to make sure it's not just released at one point. We want to make sure the jig is released all the way around. And now as I start pulling this form out, I'm going to give it a little bit of pressure, but I'm going to be careful not to squeeze. Now I've got about, I don't know, half an inch, maybe more sticking up. That means that the bottom of my work, put you back down a little bit, the bottom of my work is now unsupported. So right down in here. So I don't want to put a ton of pressure down here anymore because there's no jig in there to stop me from crushing my form. So I'm just going to keep going. The opposite hand is just steadying the clay and then bringing it straight out. Easy peasy. I'm going to tip this, not because I do this in normal studio practice, but just so you can see how sweet it is. And then we've got our flat sides and our round corners there. So where I can reach, which is pretty far down, the mason jar is pretty wide. I can get my hand almost all the way in. I'm going to start addressing my inner seams. So what I do is I take the clay that's overlapped, whatever the top side is, I'm going to take that clay and bring it over and close the seam. What I am finding with our jigs, because of the pressure that we're putting on from the outside, just in the shaping process, you're compressing the clay a lot. So this seam is pretty closed already, but we want to just double up on our efforts and make sure we're not leaving any room for error. Anything that I can't reach, I will get when I flip it over, and then I just take my vinegar slip. It's just white distilled vinegar on my studio brush, and I'm going to make sure that that seam is really pretty and buttoned up. And the bottom, I will take care of when I get to the bottom part. So that is the main body. I'm going to just put this over. My clay is pretty set up, so I'm comfortable moving that guy. And this, I'll show you how dry my clay is here. You can see I'm holding it, and this is not flopping over. So this is about how dry your clay should be at the end here. I can still bend this, and you'll see in a second, I'm going to manipulate this clay, but it is pretty sturdy. So I think if you start working at this point for this project, if the clay gets too wet, it can just start working against you. Okay, so I'm going to score the outside edge here. I don't want to disrupt my pretty pattern in there. So I'm going to put you back down a little bit more. Just score right along the edges. I've already scored the bottom piece of the main body of the mason jar. And then I am going to add some vinegar slip here all the way around. And this is another kind of preference thing. I don't, sometimes I'll put slip on both the pieces, and sometimes I'll put slip on just one side. So usually when I'm working like with this kind of project, I just put slip on the bottom, on the base, but you could also slip both sides too if that's your studio practice. Whatever works for you. Okay, actually gonna bring this guy back up here for you. There we go. And I am going to pop my little bottom on here. Usually I do a dry fit, but sometimes when I'm live or when I'm filming, I just forget to do steps that I always do. So it is smart to dry fit this first. The nice thing about our forms, when you have the cutters that come with it, it's pretty bang on. So, but if you are more careful than me, then you will measure, twice and cut once. So I'm just going to go around. I'm going to tack this down lightly because I'm actually going to bring in my anvil and pop in my foot here. The bottom for this, you do want to make sure that your flat sides are on your flat sides. So there is a direction for your bottom, so you're not getting it confused. Let's go back. Any questions while I'm fighting with my camera?
I have a question. Where do you find your corks?
Corks. Oh, we just took a trip to see my sister in North Carolina. So this one we found at Brickyard. Nope. Scott's shaking his head no. He's my quality control. He keeps me in line. I think we found these at Brickyard. Kentucky Mudworks?
Maybe.
Okay, so I found these on the road. Hello. I found these on the road, which already had this cute little tie, so I don't have to do that, which was really sweet. But Amazon, I'm part of the problem. It's me. I get a lot from Amazon. But if your local pottery shop, I would check there because a lot of them do stock kind of these fun additions for your work. So, but Amazon is where I get mine from usually. Okay, any other questions, my dear?
Are you going to be at the Fire Arts Expo?
Yes, I am. Hopefully close to your booth, Jess, so we can.
Hopefully. I'm going to be apparently in the other room. Are you in the third?
Did they put you in the basement?
They're putting me in. I'm in the basement. So if you want to come take classes from me, you got to come to the creepy pottery basement.
Oh my gosh. We are in a separate room. I did hear that. I just don't know if all the teachers are in the same room because I think it was loud last year.
I was loud. I yelled. So
you did.
Well,
you were loud, but I think you had to, right? Because it was loud. Yeah.
I'm going to have a speaker system, so I don't have to yell, but it'll still be loud.
That's such a good idea. You know what? My son just took a sword. He casted an aluminum sword yesterday, which the sword guy, I forget his name, super cool. But he had a speaker system. He had a headset and then one speaker. And I was like, this guy knows how to do things. And probably because he has a ton of experience teaching and, you can't stream your voice like that for hours. So I think the speaker system is brilliant. And then maybe we can do some karaoke.
Absolutely. It'll be fun.
Is Kevin coming this year?
Kevin's coming. Yes, it's going to be off the hook. So disco ball, everybody, you bring a disco ball. We'll have a good time. We brought a speaker system to Nsika and tested that out. But Nsika was very loud, so it didn't work. We talk about this after. And anybody else who's interested, we'll have a conversation another time about this.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some DJ out there, some person who knows more than we know. They can chime in. Okay, so what I have done is baked my foot. I popped in the bottom with our small anvil. That just gives me a little bit of lift on the bottom of my pot. I can pretend like I put a lot of effort into the foot there and it looks really pretty. Now I am just securing the joint where my bottom is attached to the mason jar. I use our mini shark fin foot tool for this. And at first I start off really wide and that brings up the clay. Now the important part about this project is because you have flat and round, you can't just crank the wheel and let it go. You will start losing the shape that you put in. So go round around the corner and then visually where you see it starts going flat, make sure you're dipping in nice and flat. And the form does, it's kind of hard to see, but it does have this small little dip here. So you can see there. So when you're following your foot, just remember this shape that you laid into the bottom there. So you can even keep one of these for reference. So you can, kind of make sure you're not undoing the pretty little shape that you just put in. So round around the corners and then flat with that little dip in the side. I like to carve into my bottoms. So I leave this pretty broad down here, although we left for out of town and this poor little guy got left behind drying and I didn't carve him before I left. So this is what that looks like when it's not carved. So this little guy, and then it's just a nice finish to the foot there. So we're closing up. We've put a ton of pressure on this pot with the jig. So our seams are really nice and compressed, but we want to make sure we're picking up any extra slip. Finish your bottoms, nice, neat bottoms. You could leave this. Bottoms are also just a point of expression. I love to see what people do. If you want to leave extra clay and fill it up, or if you want to really taper this in, I like to carve. Bottoms, I think, are part of the artist's signature. You can really kind of get creative and do what you like down there. So I'm not going to fuss much more here. I just want it nice and smooth. And the real reason for doing this is just to make sure our bottom is not going to detach from the base. People like their bottoms to stay on their pots. So it's kind of hard to see here. I'm going to just finish my seam here at the top. But at the bottom where we attached, hello, I'm going to now take a rubber shaper and just go around that inner seam at the bottom, just to make sure we're nice and buttoned up and closed in. Can I stand for that guy? I'm kind of short. And any long tool will work for this. If you've got a clay knife, I don't think you'll be able to get your finger in here because this is pretty narrow at the top, and I don't think you want to chance that. But don't forget the seams. So sometimes it gets really exciting to build with the forms, and then we kind of forget that we still have to do that inside stud. And then I like to run my vinegar slip on the inside here, just to smooth and get any schnibs out of there. I don't want anything sharp. So the last thing I'm going to do is make sure that we are nice and round here. And I'll show you, I was a little out of round, and I could tell when I put my rim cone in, if there's any gapping, and you can kind of feel it come back to shape, which is really cool. So as long as I don't see any gaps between the rim cone and my form, I can assume that we are nice and true up there. And then if you are going to put in something like this cork, it's really important. If your work starts to get oblong, these kind of finishes won't fit in there nicely. You'll have to start shaving down cork, and you can ask my husband, Scott, that's not fun. So even at the seam, there's a little bit of space in there. You see right in there, but that's no matter. And I still have to glaze this anyway. So this is going to fit beautifully when it's done. Nice and round at the top. Okay, so from here, how much time do I have, Jess? Have I gone over?
No, we still have like 15 minutes if you want it.
Yay, let's chat. Okay, let's talk about some stuff. I'm going to have Scott switch to the front camera, and then I'll give you some ideas of what to do there. All right, you caught me drinking water. I thought I could do it fast enough. Okay, so fun things that you can make to accompany this project. I have so many plans. The mason jar itself is really cute. I'm going to move this guy. But my good friend Amanda, she said that we could do the flower frog. So you've got a flower frog class, and
It will
flower
fit a
frogs,
flower frog, yeah.
yes, yes. So a super popular thing for anything that's going to hold flowers. And if you've got my kids still bring me flowers, and it's like the sweetest thing. It's my favorite. But they're kind of like these onesie twosies, so you can really arrange. The flower frog is beautiful for that. You could do any kind of top, like the cork. You could make a clay top for this. So what you would want to do is just, using any size, you could even have a top that hung off to the side a little bit. And this could easily become a lidded jar, which lidded jars, if you feel like you've been selling the same thing, you can reinvent the things that you've been making. So if you make a lot of mugs, you can put a lid on the mug, and then people love it. And then you've got something fresh to offer. And then if you're really consistent with your shape, you can have kind of an offering for tops that go with your mugs or your jars, and then people can mix and match. If that stresses you out, if the thought of people mixing and matching at markets or for sale like that, you don't have to do that. But it is kind of fun if you give people an option and they can kind of pick whatever they want to put in there. So flower frog, lid for this. You can, you know what I forgot to show you guys? I did this faux threading around here because mason jars have that threaded function. This will not fit an actual mason jar lid, but I just put that in for decoration. You don't have to do that, or you can slip trail that if you want to give it like a 3-dimensional, or if you're really good at slip trailing, you could probably slip trail the word ball or mason on here, and that would be really cool. So just a few ideas. I will use this personally for myself, flowers for sure, and then I will make little canisters. You could even have these in the kitchen for like flower canisters, sugar. This would be perfect for that. And then of course we have all the sizes. So mug size, and then our salt and pepper. So let's chat. Do we have any questions?
We do. So what size rim cone do you use for the large mason jar?
Regular. Thank you for asking. The question was, is this going to be a regular mouth mason jar or a narrow mouth? And I think we're kind of in between. Before our rim cones, it is a regular, and that will fit in beautifully. And the regular will serve for the 2 larger forms. But when you get into the salt and pepper or the petite, I made like a toothpick holder out of one of these too, which is a perfect size for that. You will want to use our mini rim cone, and that will fit in the petite size. But the other 2, you can use the regular rim cone that you've got.
Fabulous. Let's see. The other question is, I know you shared the cork where you got it. size is that cork?
What size is that cork? I
Listen.
bet Scott still has I've learned from Glacier, Scott is always armed with a ruler. So I'm like, people are gonna ask me measurements. What's the diameter? He's working his magic.
And I will
3 inches? 3 inch.
3 inches. So 3 inches
At the top.
and
What's the bottom?
at the top is 3
Yeah, the
inches.
top is 3 inches, and then I'll have him give you the height, and I'll have him give you the bottom. I would link this for you, but I got this in person. So if I can find something
that one
similar
came
on
from
Amazon.
Brickyard. Is that what you
This
said?
was Brickyard or
And you
Kentucky
can get them,
Mudworks.
but you can get them from.
I'm sure
Okay, great.
Amazon.
Absolutely, I'm sure.
I haven't seen them with the leather strap already in them. I'm sure that exists somewhere, but this was the only place I've seen. So you might, if you want to do the pull, just wet your cork and then you can drill through and then you can make whatever pull. I usually do like a faux leather cord or just something soft, like a nice robust cotton or something. Okay, we've got measurements. The bottom is
2.5.
2.5 on the bottom, 3 on the top, and it is, we'll tell you how tall it is.
About 1.25.
1.25 tall. So
And
2 on the bottom, 1.25, and then 3 on
Okay.
top.
All right. And so folks were asking if they use different clay that shrinks at different rates.
Yeah.
You know, you'll have to check
Yeah, the cool thing
because
about cork, especially when it's tapered, it really does fit. It's kind of like our rim cone because of the tapered shape, it fits a lot. So what I would make sure is you're at least clearing the minimum because this is really the part that needs to fit, you know. So clear your minimum part there, and then you can kind of mess with. But cork is pretty forgiving. I've had Scott shave down cork before for me. We'll wet it and then he'll sand it down for me. Just, you know, sometimes we have to make adjustments.
it happens. Things move.
It happens. It happens to me too. All right, potters, we're just like real people.
And then someone suggested you can find corks on Kentucky Mudworks website. So
This
good.
could be, we went to both, so this could very
Mhm.
well be where that, and I'm kicking myself because I probably should have bought more, but I wanted to see how it worked first. And I knew when I saw them that I wanted to put them in my mason jars. So maybe I'll have to make another drive.
Now you did a salt and pepper shaker demo with us. Was that
Yeah.
this year's Clay Share Con that you did that? Or was that a separate? It was in
No,
February.
that was another live at 5. Our
That was a
Glacier
live at
Con was the faceted.
Was
So
the
we did the
faceted.
faceted form. Okay, Scott found it, Kentucky Mudworks. He's the
Awesome.
best. Look at him.
Wow,
Google.
he's fast.
He's so
He
good.
Googles.
He knew I was going to
Fastest
ask
Google in
him.
the West. Look at that.
Yeah, draw your phone. So, yeah, but we did do the faceted salt and pepper shaker, which Scott has. I can show you. And I have not done a
Wonderful.
class for the mason jar, but I can tell you. So these were, this is an unfinished. I've been kind of playing with my cork placement. So they are taller. The mason jar, let me see if I can put it where you can see it. So the mason jar, salt and pepper shaker is shorter. So it's a smaller project. And that's why these were really good for little toothpick holders. So if you want to make like a toothpick striker or a toothpick holder, this would be the one. You might have to alter the top because you won't need a top piece because it's not a shaker. So it actually ends up being a little bit shorter. Yeah, thanks. Man, how good is my husband? Let's give a round of applause to Scott Mensky. He's the best. So this
Okay,
is a
yeah.
toothpick holder. I did not add the top on, just the bottom. And then you could put like that striking paper on there too. But I will have a class for these two.
Okay.
I'll do all the sizes. Yeah.
All right. And just so folks know, if you get the salt and pepper mason jars like the jigs now, you can go back and watch the faceted one because that'll just basically give you the techniques. You're just using a different form and it's a little smaller. So you need a little less clay.
And you just have that hugging in because with the facet, you're not dealing with any shoulder. So there's no curve, but it's literally just a mini version of what we just did. So I build them the same way. I use my hands to wrap the clay in. And then, yeah, the only differences would be for the holes for the cork and then your holes on top. But yeah, I will have a class out for that. The mason jar class I've already have filmed. And then I'll do a mug. So for this size, this was meant to be a little mason jar mug. So that'll be up. shortly too, because we need to have a mug. I have to have a mason jar mug, or else I just can't even call myself a potter.
Right, right. There you go. Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, anything else before we go?
No, I hope you had fun. I think this is such a neat project. I think
It's so fun.
mason jars are just like a classic shape. And I just really love, I want to encourage just if you have not done projects where there's multiple techniques involved, this makes it so easy. So the shoulder can be intimidating, especially in hand building. A neck can be intimidating. So it just makes it's so easy to do. Please give it a shot. And I love to see pictures. I always like to see what you all make. Flood me with your photos of your mason jars. I would love that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. We can find
You're
you at
welcome.
alexandriapotteryco.com, and you're on
Mhm.
Instagram as Alexandria
Pottery
Pottery
tools.
Tools.
That's right.
So be sure to go give you a follow. All right. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
you're
being here.
welcome, honey.
All right.
We'll see
Stay
ya.
after. We'll chat. All
Okay,
right,
we'll chat.
everyone. Thank you for being here tonight for the first Live at 5 I've done in a couple weeks. Next week, the schedule is we'll have a prime time next week, I believe. So I don't think we'll do a live 5 at 5 next week. But stay tuned. For my premium members, we're not doing a prime time tonight, but there will be a Good Morning Clayshare. We're going to talk a little bit about Clayshare schedule and the live broadcast. We'll still be doing live broadcasts, but I'm actually going to cut back on the lives a little bit and do more recorded classes for you all. And that way you'll still get such fabulous, great content. It'll just be recorded, and then you can comment on the recordings and I can chat with you there, but they won't all necessarily be live, but you'll still get all of the same great information on Clayshare. So go check out Alexandria Pottery Co. and Alexandria Pottery Tools on Instagram. Here's some of my favorites. Her rim cones I have. We could stack them all up and have a good time right there with them like a little fountain. And then she has so many other of her jigs. So check those out. That's one of her nesting mugs. And this is the faceted cup that she did with us. And if you go on clayshare.com and you love Alex's tutorials, do you know now you can sort our classes by instructor? And Alex is listed as one of our instructors. So you can go and say, oh, I love her. I want to see everything she's ever done on Clayshare. And you can do that, which is really great. So check that out. We also have all of the other folks who've ever taught classes listed on there. So you can pick your favorite instructor and just like binge out on all of their classes. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here with me and with Alex. A huge thank you for her coming in and joining us and doing the demo tonight. And I will see my premium members on Monday. Everybody else, take care, be well, and as always, make great pots. Good night, everyone. All right, yeah.